What's the number of them?
There are about 150, I think. Quite a small number. Now, many of the trilobites related to this have eyes which have a curved profile, like this, not very straight, like this one. The first thing to say. The second thing to say is this is pretty obviously a benthic trilobite. Nothing pelagic about this one. It's only seeing, it's got a field of view that looks sideways. Yeah? Like this. Like this. Now, if you look at it sideways, it's equally amazing. It's pretty obvious that it was important for this animal to have good sight. It's invested a lot of technology in its eyes. Now, with this spiny morphology, this is certainly a benthic animal. It's starting to roll up, this particular one. So it lived on the seafloor. Well, I had an idea about how this eye might work. As an animal living on the seafloor, at about moderate shallow depths, what it needs to do is to, if it is a hunter, is to keep extraneous light coming from the seawater above. See, most trilobite eyes are curved like this. Okay, have a curved profile. Now, because they are seeing normal to the surface of the eye, okay, it means as you go further away from the eye, the cone of light between one end lens and the next gets wider. Okay? So vision gets less precise. Now, my trilobite, if I can call it that, has a very straight eye, which means that the cone, that each lens, as you go further away, stays the same distance. So the vision is just as acute. But the further away you go, the weaker the light. So what does it need to do if it is to hunt properly? It needs to keep out light that is coming from above. It's like if you are looking at a distant piece of game in Africa. Everybody does this. Keep the sun. Just the same. It's very easy actually to experiment with this by just taking a light to represent the sun and turning it round. This is looking at the side until you get above it, where the eye shade very quickly cuts out all the extraneous light, all the extra light. So this was a trilobite, I think, with very, very acute, distant vision, living in shallow water, and there's other evidence that this belongs to a group that were likely to be predatory in habits. So it was using this to detect its prey. It also answers one question which people have said about Phacophida, the trilobites with these sorts of lenses. Some people have said they are nocturnal animals, losing very feeble light. But I think this may show that actually this one certainly lived during the daytime, hunted during the daytime. I don't know what that means. How do I get rid of it? Give me a moment. Whoops. Okay. Now, so we're getting a picture, something of trilobite vision. Now we have to put it together into some sort of community. I've already mentioned that trilobites lived in various habitats, from shallow water to deep water. When I proposed these so-called, well, I call them communities. Now we would call them biobases. Way back in 1975, I think it was. At that time it was quite a new idea. In fact, there was some literature that said trilobites didn't show this sort of habitat preference. But I think everybody accepts now that there are different sorts of trilobites living in different habitats. I've already mentioned the Bathyurids in North America, on benthic forms, shallow shelf, Nileids living out on open shelf, and in deeper water, trilobites that could cope sometimes with low oxygen, olenids. Throughout geological time, almost from the Lower Cambrian, I think trilobites were differentiated into different communities like this. From shallow, this is lime mounds, or reef in some senses, if you like, very specialized habitat. And then we have our pelagic trilobites occupying the open ocean. So we're getting a little bit more of a complex picture of how trilobites live. This goes from this is an example from somebody else's work of the Carboniferous, just about the end of the history of the trilobites, but even at the end of the history of the trilobites, near it, we still have different trilobites living here, in shallow water, reefs, and out here deep water trilobites, which include things that go blind. I've already mentioned those in Avalonia. I hope you see how these two lectures fit together. It would be, in some ways, it would be better to give this one first, but never mind. Blinder ones in deep water, and then open shell forms here with good eyes. This is a very important component of the total diversity of trilobite species. Within each habitat, of course, trilobites could do different or do similar things. Some might be sediment feeders, some might be swimmers, some might be hunters, like the one I just talked about. So how can we get an idea about the different ways trilobites might live? And then, of course, you've seen something like this already. Different sorts of trilobites living in these range of habitats occupy different paleoplates, different paleocontinents around the world. So we're going to have profiled trilobites from shallow to deep here, and here, and here, and there may be different species in each one. So now you can see why there are so many trilobites, or at least some vision of that. I talked about that already. How can we distinguish between the different feeding habits of the trilobites? This is the next, and I think, very important question. And I think there is some generalities you can make about this. To do this, you have to turn the trilobite upside down and look at its underside, where there is a plate called the hyperstome. And the hyperstome, this plate here, at the back end of the hyperstome is the mouth, or was the mouth, just here. And under the head, of course, there are limbs, which are very rarely preserved as fossil, which provide the means of feeding sediment or prey or whatever it is towards the mouth. So obviously, if you're going to talk about diet, a very good place to look is at this hyperstome and on the underside of the animal and its relation to feeding. One thing to note, the larva, which I've already talked about, and all trilobites except perhaps one group, as far as I know, in the protaspis, the larva is attached. Right? So anything that happens to the hyperstome through growth is going to be a derived character. Now there are two very important ways in which the hyperstome of different trilobites varies. In many trilobites, the hyperstome is a very large, robust structure which is rigidly attached to the underside of the animal, so-called doubler. This would be a very good example. But then there's another great group of trilobites in which the hyperstome is not attached, but apparently lies freely on the underside of the animal, underneath the front of the glabella, if you know that term, the convex area in the middle of the head on the upper surface. That would be an example here. Usually the doubler in these cases is quite thin. Not always, but quite thin. So there's a gap between the hyperstome and the margin. Now, these hyperstomes have very different history and form. Let's go first to the attached hyperstomes. Now, it is true to say, in all the trilobites, that the most specialized hyperstones are the attached ones. They're the largest, they have different functions, and they have different forms. Very frequently, they get forks at the back end. They very often have sculpture. They're sometimes more or less completely modified to cover up the underside of the head. They are always very robustly attached to the underside of the head. In other words, they are part of a very stiff skeleton. And it seemed pretty obvious to me that these are adaptive and that they are the kind of hyperstone you would need if you were dealing with prey and bulky food, animal food. You see, the animal with its limbs can process the food at the back end of the hyperstone before putting it into the mouth. These sorts of animals are also, among the trilobites, invariably the largest. They grow, this includes all the giants that grow up to this sort of size, or indeed almost any trilobite that's larger than about that is a form with an attached hyperstone. Of course, predators and scavengers get more nutritious food than other kinds of lifestyle, and they're likely to grow to the largest size. It's always an advantage to be big if you're a predator. And just to show you some examples of hyperstones, with attached hyperstones and their posterior modifications, many of them independently develop these forks at the back end, and the forks themselves, some of them actually have little rasps. Isotelus, for example, have little rasps on the inside of the fork. You know what a rasp is? It's a series of like, you know, when you are grating lemons or oranges, like that. That is a rasp. Oops. So you get rasps on the inside of the hyperstone here. Some odontoplurids, for example, have a rough area, like a nutmeg grater. That won't mean much to you. A coarse thing for shredding material here. And some have huge forks, which you can see preventing anything escaping. So all the interesting modifications, that's the primitive one, that happen in these kind of attached hyperstones happen at the posterior margin and in forms with attached hyperstones. What did they do? Well, I think they were predators. And I think that their trace fossils tended to be the kind that we call rugophytes. Tend to be very large. This is a giant one from Australia, this long. Must have been attached to an asaphid trilobite. And you can very often see, if you look at these things, actual evidence of the animal hunting. This is a trace fossil taken from an oblique angle, and that's the head. You've got to put the trilobite back on top of this if you can. That's the head, and I hope you can see the head is digging down into the sediment. And when it does so, the bases of the limbs, of the walking limbs, are left behind in the sediment behind. That's a very nice example. You can almost see the limbs working away there in the head region. This belongs to a phacophide, probably. Now, by contrast, those trilobites with the free-floating hyperstone, which include very many trilobites, used to be thought of as primitive. I don't think they are. I think they're more advanced. In this case, the hyperstone is not attached at the doubler. There's the doubler coming around here. You can see it. Nice rostral plate there. And to find specimens to illustrate this point, you need to find animals that died on their backs. Because normally the hyperstone just gets lost. That's an isolated hyperstone. We all know specimens like that. The problem is finding which trilobite they belong to. But you see, if they died on their backs, the hyperstone simply falls into the head in the right position. So these are very different sorts of trilobites. Now, most of them are small. Many of them have quite a lot of thoracic segments, sometimes lots of thoracic segments. Many of them have quite small tails. And in my view, this adaptation was almost certainly for eating sediment, for grazing, which is a very common arthropod habit. It's not very nutritious compared with eating animals, so most of these animals stay small. On the other hand, it's a very common livelihood, way of earning a living, because there are lots of things to eat in sediments. So these animals tend also to be very numerous in one locality. If you find one, you'll find 1,000. Everybody knows probably Elrathia, which occurs in millions, not thousands. So these are the grazing trilobites. I call this hyperstone the natant condition. Native trilobites, in my view, had this particular lifestyle. And they made very different trace fossils from the Rusophytus-like hunting burrows. They tended to make burrows that went through the sediment, ploughing it, eating it, processing it, pushing it out back. Now, the problem with trilobite, with trace fossils in general, everybody knows, is it's very hard to find the animal with the fossil. And just a few years ago, with Dulceilaca, I found a place where you could find trace fossils, very distinctive ones, like this, in the same beds as trilobites, fragments only, but we were able to match them for size. Now the question is, what was the primitive mode? This is difficult to say, but I think that probably most early trilobites had attached hyperstones, and that maybe the primitive life mode was actually the predatory one, not the sediment-eating one. But this is for discussion. That was just a primitive trilobite with an attached hyperstone. But there's a third category. You can hunt using your good eyes. You can eat sediment. Oh, I should say, I must mention this because it's important. It's quite a simple thing to think of how the hyperstone functions in this case. I might say throughout the long geological time, these hyperstones stay exactly the same. They don't do anything interesting compared with the attached hyperstones. You can see a carboniferous hyperstone looks the same as a Ordovician hyperstone, because all the hyperstone is doing, I think, in this case, is acting as a scoop. It's loosely suspended. It's attached by the anterior wings at the front end, here and here, yes? But otherwise probably free to move on the venter. Just scoops the sediment into the gut. Nothing exciting. Anyway, another way of earning a living is to whip sediment into suspension, filter feeding, and extract edible particles from the suspension. And I think trilobites did this too, and this was a very special kind of morphology, which is typified by these beautiful trilobites, my favourite probably, the trinucleans, which have a very convex head, very convex glabella, mid part of the head, and a very flat body, and usually very long genal spines. You can't see it on this one, but you can see it on that one. That's the typical morphology of the trinuclean. You see, the head is much more convex than the body, than the thorax and tail. And if you look at it sideways, it looks like this. There's the head, there are these long genal spines, and there's the thorax and tail suspended above the sediment surface. What this does is have a chamber underneath the body. The hyperstone, very important again, is in these forms is often inside the head, under here, and going up like this. So the mouth is nowhere near the sediment surface, but it does leave a chamber, a clear chamber for filtering on the underside. And this sort of morphology appears time and time again in the trilobites, in many different families. I think it was another way of earning a living. Stirring sediment, filtering out the particles, and is characterized by hyperstones that run up inside the animal and by a chamber beneath the body. And they leave very distinctive trace fossils that are consistent with this. you don't have to know much about trilobites to see that's made by the last animal, or one of its relatives. These are the scoops left beside by the sediment being stirred up, yes, into suspension. And here's one, look, this is a very good one, Ken Campbell's picture, in which there's one area, the animal feeds there. No point in making it doesn't plough, doesn't make a furrow, it just moves on to a new position. Goes there, first there, then there, then there, then there, each time scooping the sediment. So these are the three major ways of trilobites earning a living: hunting, scavenging, eating sediment, and filter feeding. So now we're beginning to get somewhere to breaking down trilobite diversity in a given assemblage. This is one particular fauna that I worked on with my friend Bob Owens in Wales, in which we've divided the trilobites into those different life habits in the same location. This one we have pelagic animals, we have streamlined ones, we have unstreamlined ones, fast ones, slow ones. In the benthic habitat we have predators and scavengers of different sizes, large, middle-sized and small, presumably with different prey in mind. And we have quite a lot of filter chamber, quite numerous filter chamber forms, two different sizes, so they don't compete. And in this particular locality, only one very small particle feeder. So you can see we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 different coexisting trilobites in one place, all doing different things in one particular habitat. So if you put all that together and you add their biogeography and habitat range, you get some idea, and time, you get some idea of why there are so many trilobites. Can you take the story any further? Yes, I think you can. Although not everyone agrees with this. There are some places where you find very peculiar assemblages of trilobites. All, I think, modified from the particle feeding type with long thorax. This is a piece of this sort of limestone from Scandinavia. Does occur in places in China, where you get one species, usually just all by itself, great numbers, and when you break the rock, you get a very nasty smell, sulfur smell. I'm afraid I don't know the Chinese for sulfur, but maybe they do. But you know this bad smell? Now, this particular habitat is used by one particular kind of trilobite called the Olenids. And it's my belief that these were the first well-documented animals in the fossil record that liked to specialize to live in a very low oxygen habitat, which quite a number of organisms do today. And in this habitat, they feed on bacteria, which are called colorless sulfur bacteria. They actually use, the bacteria actually use the sulfur in their metabolism. There are many living organisms that do this. Well, trilobites that live in this habitat always occur in lots of single species assemblages. Nothing else lives there. And furthermore, they show some interesting adaptations consistent with it. Here's an Orbidissian one. You can see it's one of these with a free-floating hypostome. With a great number of thoracic segments, very large thorax and tail, in fact. Now, trilobites have on each segment a breathing organ, a lung, a gill. So if you have lots of segments, you have lots of gills, so you can cope with low oxygen. The more the better. The head is quite small, and the hypostome is exceedingly small for any trilobite. In some of them, the hypostome becomes, the word is atrophied, hardly there. So it's a special kind of trilobite. This is from a living clam that lives in the same environment, which uses these sulfur bacteria to feed on. Now, they either cultivate them, grow them, and feed on them directly, or in some cases they can absorb nutrients directly from the bacteria into the gut in some living form. Here's some typical olenids. That one you've seen. That shows you the gill branches here that will absorb oxygen on one called Triarthros. Imagine that there are many, many segments, each with these little filaments. Lots of oxygen can be gathered from a low oxygen environment. Here is one with the hypostome in place, dead on its back. And can you see how ridiculously small the hypostome is here? This is almost disappeared. I think this animal probably didn't feed actively at all. Didn't feed on sediment, it just grew bacteria. It was a gardener. And some in this habitat also developed most extraordinary structures here in the front of the head. See this great big bulb? Again, this is a bit controversial. It's like a balloon. I think this could have been a brood chamber for looking after the baby trilobites until they were big enough to get their own sulfur bacteria. There are precedents for this in some brooding living organisms. That's just to show you how widespread these brood pouches are, or possible brood pouches are in various trilobites. And often they occur in a pair, one species with, one species without. And maybe that's finally the male and female, who knows. And there's two living examples of brooding arthropods. Baby ostracods are kept in there. I can't remember what that one is, but it's also a copepod. They're kept in there until they are quite big. So there is precedent for this in other parts of the arthropods. Anyway, these were probably very specialized animals coping in a very special habitat. The trilobites got there first. Okay, let's finish up with some delightful puzzles. Now, first of all, this one, oops, go back. You were asking yesterday about spines, occipital spines, bending to one side. Here it is, oops, on this species. Okay, bends to one side. What is this trident for? This is a structure on the front of a head of another Moroccan trilobite. This is in this paper, GE, that you haven't got, I don't think. The unique structure, I don't know what it's for. Remember, trilobites had a rigid front of the head. They couldn't bend the spines. These are three different species of one particular genus called Wallicerops. One has a long handle on the fork, one has no handle at all, one has a short handle. They have many other differences. That's what they look like from the side. This one, here, the handle comes up in the air, so the fork is off the sediment surface here. In this one, there's no handle and it's on the level with the sediment surface. So if that animal wants to walk along, I think it has to lift its head backwards. I don't know what the Chinese for forklift truck is, but you know these things that lift up. Yes, like that. When it does that, it has to move this spine to one side to stop it tangling with these. Okay? So it's quite like your Schumacher case. Got it? I will send you this paper. But as for what the fork did, I have no idea. Everywhere I go, I ask an audience like you, what was the trilobite doing with its fork? And everywhere I get a different answer. It wasn't to catch fish, I can tell you that. But this is otherwise quite a well-protected animal with lots of spines. must have been benthic, and has eyes rather like the amazing one with the tower-like form, but these are more usual. It was probably another hunter.
Could it be like a stag beetle, you know, like for mating, sort of?
Yeah, it could well be.
Showing how sort of tough it was, you know.
Well, yes, I think when you've eliminated everything else, what you're left with is a secondary sexual characteristic. I just want to finish up with these because I've only just seen these. Giant trilobites. How big did they get? Sometimes they got very large indeed. And in Portugal, there's a place where there's a little museum where they're full of giant slabs, bedding surfaces covered with giant trilobites. And this is actually one called Ogigynous Fortey, which grows to a huge size. Maybe a reference to my son, I don't know. But they're also known from Morocco. Both of these places are near the Ordovician pole. This is one I took just 2 weeks ago when I was making a film with David Attenborough. Monospecific, very large natural assemblages of huge trilobites. Whoops, that must be it. Okay, we'll go back to that. That's another puzzle. Why really no immature ones? Because trilobites molted. This must be a death assemblage, I think. Gather together. Well, why do arthropods gather together when they're large size? Probably for mating purposes. Leaving the young ones behind, they go to a special place. I saw a similar thing with Limulus in Delaware Bay, the horseshoe crab, this year. But I show these to finish up with because we have not got all the answers yet. And that still leaves lots of interesting questions for you young people to solve in the future. And that, I think, is the end.
Thank you.
We've run over time a little bit, I'm afraid.
Yes. Yeah, please.
Do you know what taxa and large belong to? Is red hot?
Yes, that we do in many cases. Because you can find that slide is supposed to show it. You find every intermediate stage between a very small larva and an adult. You can find all the models. But there are many cases where we still don't know what the larva of the trilobite is like, because you have to have very good preservation and lots of material to make the connection all the way through. But we know more and more each year of the so-called ontogeny of trilobites. Now we know dozens.
Another thanks for your interesting lectures. Today you present here. Today is the 4th day, but you did tell us a lot of truths. Thank you. And I think you, coming to your speech, I think you teach all the young people and including older people to how to based on the real fact to analysis some or suggesting some principle. So your methods, you tell us very good methods and principles, scientific and modern idea. I think it's important for everybody to work on biogeography, because you can see biogeography not the same. Everybody produces different.
Yes, that's true.
So one thing I think is important, whole fund. If you just work on one, like the same survey, you work on Mesoretus,
yes.
Then said, oh, South China is close to Gondwana. If I said if you select Elamida or Daleda, probably China is close to Laurasia. So as a whole, the whole whole fauna is very important.
But for life habit study, it's very important to look very hard at the individual species, the individual specimen, I think.
Individual scale, I mentioned the Prince program. If you depend on scale, if you work on regional cost, you should use a specific level. But if you large scale, except for mesopelagic, very difficult to use a specific level.
Yes.
Because the identification is rather subjective.
Yeah, well, my postdoc, Tim McCormick, spent 2 years trying to prove that Carolinensis genesineca was the same all the way around the world using a modern morphometric analysis. But it took him 2 years to work on one species. So we just don't have that time, most of us.
Yeah, difficult. My question is mesopelagic trilobite, for example, Saccharomyces. Theoretically, it should be the same environment. But the problem is everywhere you identify different species for Saccharomyces genome.
Yes.
Not widespread. If you in specific level, never wide cover.
But
I don't know.
I mean, I agree with you. That is in the literature. But I think if you properly revise, say, Microparia, I'm quite sure that you will find some species are virtually worldwide. They're very, very similar in widely separated localities. Partly that may just be taxonomy. And Cyclopygia itself, I think, has probably very widespread species. So I think proper global revision may reduce the number of species, and so some of them are more widespread. But there are, you're right, in another way, there are some things like Xenocyclopygia, very peculiar Chinese genus. Don't think it's known anywhere else, maybe up in Kazakhstan.
Also, Cyclopygia species also different everywhere. I suggest, if it is possible, because it is mesopelagic, 100 probably to 400, you said.
Yes.
Probably this is like to stay 150 meter level. This is like to stay 200 meter level. Then probably a little bit environment difference. This is also a reason.
It would be an interesting thing to put a PhD student on, I think.
Yeah,
it's a wonderful project.
In China, we have
they could go all around the world.
Very good record because associated with different basic bases.
Yes.
So you can tell the different level. In this case, yes, specific level different.
Oh, that would be, no, that's very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, very simple question. You proposed a primitive feature for the predator of trilobites, is that right?
Yeah.
And a more derived for the particle feeder or the...
yeah,
and
that's right.
Why did this happen and when?
Well, the problem is here that if you look at, we don't know enough about the ventral sides of many very early trilobites. Regligia, for example, many of those had an attached hypostome. The doubler curves back across the preglabellar field and the hypostome is attached. When I reviewed this, I found more trilobites with attached hypostomes in the earliest strata, but we don't know the ventral surfaces, the underside, of some of the early ones. Also, if you do the cladogram with the trilobites, which I showed yesterday, the sister taxa in the related groups are virtually all of them have large hypostomes and will probably predator types. If the trilobites fit into the great group that includes the arachnids and chelicerates, which some people think as a basal member, virtually all of the living ones are also predators. So the vast majority have that habit. Also, the larval hyperstone, as I've mentioned, is attached, I think in all examples, except possibly some Proetida, which seems to me also to imply that that was the primitive mode. So that's why I think it was likely that the primitive mode was the predator-scavenger mode. The first really obviously detached hyperstones that I've been able to find are in proto-Lenids, so-called, towards the end of the lower Cambrian, just into the middle Cambrian. So that's 10, 15 million years after the origin of the group. But that evidence could change, because it's not very good for these early forms.
I agree with you. I think one probable reason could be in Cambrian, trilobites are one of the most strongest predators in the sea. So, but one goes into ocean, more stronger animal comes, like large nautilites. So trilobites need to find some other way to feeding themselves.
Yeah, but there were still more good predators carrying on, like acidids. Probably have some of the best hyperstones.
More diverse, so they could be derived.
Another feature which you will agree with, I'm sure, is that where you get a group like the acidids, which get to a large size and have fantastically strongly supported hyperstones, the most useful characters are on the hyperstone for species and genera, because this is where there is a lot of selection pressure for handling different kinds of prey and so on. But also you have lichids, in the order this, which are the biggest trilobites known. Lichids and acidids between them. Also very strongly supported hyperstone, which occupies a large part of the head. So yeah, they were going strong, really, as predators. By the Carboniferous, I don't think there were any really of that kind left. The last trilobites seem to me to be mostly either filter feeders or deposit feeders. They lost the predatory niche altogether by then. That's another story.
The Devonian trilobite with the fox is a predator.
Yeah, well, I think if it belongs to the Phacothide group, which I think are mostly predators.
Catches some animal.
Well, that was the first one.
Depends also, but the real is just sharp, very sharp.
Well, somebody has suggested to me there are quite a number of marine animals that hunt by crawling along. They hear something in the heavens. They have a sensor. Ahead, and then in this case they would have to crawl very quickly and grab. If it had some sensory field attached to it, paddlefish, fish in the river, do this to detect movement in the sediment. Idea number one. But another good idea, which Chris mentioned, is that it is to do with fighting. Because there's a beetle family called the rhinoceros beetle. No, I don't know I have no idea how you say that in Chinese. They're big beetles, living beetles, with horns, sometimes divided, coming on their head, and they are used for one male fights against another male.
Yeah, like a cow, I should say this like this would fight, or also possible.
Yeah, so there we are. Maybe the only general point is, some problems you can solve by thinking about them, doing experiments, doing field work, and I think you can solve them. I think you can say this is as good as we get, like pelagic habits. But there are other problems which maybe we will never be able to really say we have solved this. Too difficult.
Very good. From the fact to deduce how to deduce something from on the basis of facts.
Of real facts.
Yeah,
exactly.
Okay, time. We will have a more ceremony on behalf of our institute. With the great honor, I would like to issue a certificate. This is honorary professor of Nanjing Institute of Geology and Palaeontology, Chinese Academy of Sciences, and we acknowledge
very much.
We acknowledge very much that you offered the wonderful and interesting lectures and long-time cooperation with our staff. And I really hope, I sincerely hope you and our staff can do more cooperation in future and can accept our young staff in your museum in future. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much.